It starts with a look. You're 8 years old, standing in the kitchen doorway watching your mother stare at an empty coffee cup like it holds the answers to everything she can't say. Maybe it's the silence that stretches too long. Maybe it's the way your father's jaw tightens when he walks through the door. Maybe it's just the heaviness in the air that makes you hold your breath. And without anyone saying a word, something ancient awakens in your small body. If I don't fix this, no one will. This is how a child disappears, not physically, but psychologically. They become the family's emotional thermostat, praised for being so mature, so responsible. But no one asks. At what cost? In the next 50 minutes, you will discover the hidden psychology behind growing up too fast, why it's sabotaging your adult relationships right now, and the precise Carl Jung shadow work protocol to reclaim the child you abandoned to survive. When we speak of children who grew up too fast, we're describing a profound psychological phenomenon called developmental trauma, where a child's natural emotional needs are bypassed in service of adult responsibilities they cannot developmentally handle. This isn't simply resilience or maturity. It's a specific form of psychological splitting, where the authentic self goes into hiding, replaced by what Carl Jung called the persona, a mask of competence that becomes a prison. The problem isn't that you became capable too early. The problem is the unconscious psychological and relational price you're still paying decades later, mistaking hypervigilance for intuition, isolation for independence, and emotional numbness for strength. Meet Amy. 34, sitting in her pristine home office at 11 p.m., reviewing quarterly reports while her partner sleeps. She's been promoted 3 times in 5 years, praised for her reliability and maturity. But watch her closely, the way her shoulders never fully drop, how she checks her phone compulsively, the micro flinch when her partner reaches for her hand. Amy was 8 when her mother's depression began swallowing the household. No dramatic events, just a slow disappearance. Dad worked doubles. Mom stayed in her room. And Amy learned that if she made breakfast packed lunches and kept her younger brother quiet, maybe Mom would smile. The turning point came at 32 during a panic attack in a Target parking lot. She'd been buying birthday decorations for her team at work, something she did for everyone, when suddenly she couldn't breathe. Sitting in her car shaking, she heard a voice that hadn't spoken in decades. "When is it my birthday? When does someone take care of me?" That wasn't mental illness. That was the return of her authentic self, demanding recognition after 24 years of exile. Carl Jung's shadow work reveals 3 core mechanisms at play in premature maturation. First is psychological splitting, where the child unconsciously divides into the acceptable self, capable giving, responsible, and the shadow self, needy, afraid, angry. Jung called this the development of a false persona, a mask so convincing it eventually imprisons the wearer. Second is attachment trauma, where the child makes an unconscious bargain. I'll abandon my needs to secure belonging. This isn't weakness, it's biological intelligence, but it creates what Jung termed complexes, autonomous emotional patterns that hijack adult relationships. Third is what I call the container collapse. Healthy development requires what psychologists call containment. Adults who can hold the child's big emotions without collapsing. When this fails, the child becomes their own container, prematurely leading to hypervigilance and emotional isolation. There are 4 distinct types that emerge from this splitting. The emotional manager reads everyone's mood, prevents conflict, and sacrifices authenticity for peace. The little adult appears responsible and reliable, praised for maturity, but secretly exhausted. The invisible child needs nothing, helps everyone, and disappears emotionally to avoid being a burden. The family therapist mediates conflicts, holds secrets, and becomes the emotional dumping ground for everyone around them. Each type carries specific shadow material, suppressed rage, unmet dependency needs, and a terror of being seen as needy or weak. These survival strategies that once saved your life become the very patterns that sabotage your adult relationships and sense of self-worth. Let me walk you through the 3 most dangerous risks you face if this pattern remains unconscious, and more importantly, give you specific tools to interrupt each one. The first and most devastating risk is what psychologists call repetition compulsion in relationships. You will unconsciously recreate the childhood dynamic where you're the emotional manager and everyone else gets to be cared for. This isn't conscious, it's driven by those autonomous complexes Jung described. You'll find yourself consistently attracted to partners who need fixing, healing, or emotional regulation. Not because you're masochistic, but because this dynamic feels like love to your nervous system. Think about it. If your earliest experience of mattering came through caretaking, then receiving care without giving it back feels foreign, suspicious, even suffocating. You've learned to equate love with service intimacy, with emotional labor, and worth with usefulness. So you unconsciously choose partners who allow you to stay in the familiar role of the over-functioner while they remain in the comfortable position of being emotionally cared for. This shows up in dating as consistently choosing people who are emotionally unavailable, struggle with addiction, have unhealed trauma, or simply have never learned to be equally responsible in relationships. You become their unofficial therapist, their emotional processing center, their reliable source of stability. And for a while, this feels good because it matches your internal template for how relationships work. You matter because you're needed. But inevitably, resentment builds. You start feeling like you're always giving more than you receive, always being the strong one, always having to hold space for everyone else's emotions, while your own needs go unacknowledged. You might catch yourself thinking thoughts like, "Why doesn't anyone ever ask how I'm doing?" Or, "What would happen if I fell apart? Would anyone even notice?" But instead of recognizing this as a sign that you're repeating childhood patterns, you often conclude that you just need to find someone more grateful, more appreciative of all you do for them. The countermeasure is what I call the relationship audit, a practice that makes these unconscious patterns visible so you can choose differently. Every week, set aside 20 minutes to journal on 3 specific questions. First, in my current relationships, where am I consistently giving more emotional energy than I'm receiving? Be specific. Look at who initiates check-ins, who remembers important dates, who offers support during difficult times, who asks deeper questions, who holds space for difficult emotions. Second, what am I hoping this person will become if I just love them enough, support them enough, or wait patiently enough? This reveals the unconscious fantasy that drives over-functioning, the belief that if you just give enough, care enough, understand enough, the other person will transform into someone capable of caring for you in return. This fantasy keeps you stuck in relationships with people who may be wonderful humans, but fundamentally unavailable for the kind of reciprocal emotional intimacy you actually need. Third, when do I feel most resentful, and what unspoken expectation is underneath that resentment? Resentment is often a sign that you're giving from emptiness rather than overflow, that you're hoping your emotional investment will be recognized and reciprocated without ever directly asking for what you need. The resentment points to the places where your childhood wound is still running the show. This audit isn't about judging your current relationships or immediately ending them. It's about bringing consciousness to patterns that have been operating in the shadows. Once you can see the pattern, you can begin to make different choices about who you invest your emotional energy in and how you show up in relationships. The second risk is what I call existential emptiness in peace. Your nervous system has been calibrated for crisis, management, emotional intensity, and the constant stimulation of other people's problems. When life becomes genuinely peaceful, when you're in a healthy relationship, when your career is stable, when there's no crisis to manage, you feel restless, anxious, even depressed. Peace feels foreign and suspicious. Your system keeps waiting for the other shoe to drop because calm has never been sustainable in your experience. This often leads to unconscious crisis creation. You might pick fights with your partner about small things, create drama at work, take on other people's problems, or find yourself attracted to chaotic situations that need your intervention. It's not that you enjoy drama, it's that intensity feels like home to your nervous system. Stillness feels wrong, like you're being lazy or irresponsible. You might also experience what therapists call happiness anxiety, the fear that if you allow yourself to feel genuinely content, something terrible will happen. This stems from the childhood experience of having any moment of relaxation interrupted by family crisis that required your immediate attention. Your nervous system learned that letting your guard down was dangerous, that joy was a luxury you couldn't afford. The countermeasure is the boredom protocol, a practice designed to help your nervous system learn that peace is safe. When you notice anxiety arising in calm moments, when you catch yourself wanting to check your ex's social media, or volunteer for extra projects, or insert yourself into someone else's conflict, pause and practice this instead. Set a timer for 5 minutes and sit with the discomfort of doing nothing. Don't meditate, don't listen to music, don't scroll your phone. Just sit and breathe into the feeling of emptiness or restlessness. Notice what comes up. Often, it's the voice of the overfunctioning child saying, "This is dangerous. Someone needs me. I should be doing something productive." As you sit with this discomfort, ask yourself one question. What would I choose for myself if I wasn't afraid of being selfish? Maybe it's taking a nap, calling a friend, just to chat about nothing important, buying yourself flowers, or spending an hour doing something purely for pleasure. The goal isn't to eliminate anxiety about peace, it's to gradually expand your tolerance for calm so that your nervous system can learn that safety doesn't always require vigilance. The third risk is shadow projection, unconsciously hating in others what you've rejected in yourself. The traits you judge most harshly in other people are often the disowned parts of your own psyche, seeking integration. For those who grew up too fast, the most triggering traits are usually neediness, emotional volatility, selfishness, and what you perceive as weakness or irresponsibility. You might find yourself unusually irritated by people who ask for help frequently, who express emotions openly, who seem to prioritize their own needs, or who don't appear to carry the same level of responsibility that you do. These reactions feel justified. After all, these people do seem immature or selfish compared to your standards. But Jung taught us that these intense reactions are rarely about the other person. They're about the parts of ourselves we had to exile in order to survive. Think about it. If you had to suppress your own neediness to earn love, then other people's comfortable expression of their needs will trigger the wounded child in you who learned that needing anything was dangerous. If you had to become precociously responsible, then others' apparent irresponsibility will activate your rage about carrying burdens that were never yours to carry. If you had to manage everyone else's emotions while suppressing your own, then people who express feelings freely will trigger your envy and resentment. The countermeasure is the mirror exercise, a powerful Carl Jung shadow work practice for reclaiming these projected parts. When you notice yourself having a strong negative reaction to someone, when you catch yourself thinking things like, "They're so needy," or "They're so dramatic," or "They're so selfish," pause and ask yourself, how am I also this way? This isn't about false equivalency or taking responsibility for others' behavior. It's about recognizing that the intensity of your reaction usually indicates that you're seeing a disowned part of yourself. Maybe you're not openly needy, but you have deep unmet needs that you've never learned to express directly. Maybe you're not dramatically emotional, but you have big feelings that you've learned to suppress or manage privately. Maybe you're not obviously selfish, but you have legitimate needs and desires that you've learned to sacrifice for others' approval. For each trait that triggers you, complete this sentence: I am also trait. When I specific example. Be honest. Look for the ways that these supposedly unacceptable qualities actually show up in your life, just in more subtle or socially acceptable forms. Then ask, what would happen if I let myself be appropriately trait in my relationships? What would happen if you let yourself be appropriately needy, if you asked for help when you needed it expressed? When you were struggling, allowed others to care for you? What would happen if you let yourself be appropriately emotional, if you cried when you were sad, expressed anger when you were hurt, shared your fears and vulnerabilities? What would happen if you let yourself be appropriately selfish? If you prioritized your own needs, sometimes said no without extensive justification, chose what felt good for you, even if it disappointed others? These questions aren't about becoming irresponsible or narcissistic. They're about integrating the natural human qualities that you had to exile in order to survive your childhood. The goal of shadow work isn't to eliminate these traits in yourself or others. It's to reclaim your full humanity by accepting all parts of your psychological experience as valuable information about what you need. Now I'm going to give you the precise 3-phase protocol for healing this pattern. This isn't theory, this is a practical roadmap based on decades of Jungian analysis and trauma-informed therapy research. Each phase builds on the previous one, so don't skip ahead. The healing happens in the progression. Phase 1 is what I call discernment, and it typically takes 2 to 3 weeks of consistent practice. The goal of this phase is to develop what Jung called conscious discrimination between your authentic feelings and the emotions you've absorbed from others. After decades of emotional overfunctioning, many people who grew up too fast have lost the ability to distinguish between what belongs to them and what they're carrying for other people. The cornerstone practice is what I call emotional archaeology. Every morning before you check your phone or interact with anyone else, sit quietly for 10 minutes and do a slow body scan. Start at the top of your head and move down to your feet, noticing any areas of tension, heaviness, or discomfort. As you identify these sensations, ask yourself, what emotion am I carrying here? And whose is it? You might notice your shoulders carrying a familiar weight. Ask, whose burden am I holding here? Maybe it's your mother's anxiety about money, or your partner's stress about work, or your friend's relationship drama that they vented to you yesterday. You might feel tightness in your chest and realize you're carrying unexpressed grief, maybe your own from childhood, or maybe your father's depression that he never acknowledged. You might find tension in your jaw and recognize that you're holding words you haven't allowed yourself to speak. For each emotion, you practice this mantra. If this feeling is mine to feel, I welcome it with compassion. If this feeling belongs to someone else, I return it to them with love. This isn't about rejecting difficult emotions. It's about taking responsibility only for what's actually yours. The 24-hour exercise for this phase is designed to interrupt the unconscious pattern of emotional absorption as it happens. Set gentle reminders on your phone every 3 hours throughout the day. When the reminder chimes, pause whatever you're doing and ask yourself, whose energy am I carrying right now? How do I actually feel underneath what I've absorbed from others? This might sound simple, but after decades of automatic emotional caretaking, it can be surprisingly difficult to distinguish your authentic feelings from your absorbed ones. You might realize that what you thought was your anxiety about an upcoming presentation is actually your colleague's stress that you picked up during a meeting. You might discover that your sudden sadness isn't about your own life, but about the tragic news story your friend was processing with you over coffee. When you identify energy that isn't yours, practice a simple visualization. Imagine the emotion as a physical object that you are holding. See yourself gently placing it in the other person's hands with the intention, "This belongs to you and I trust you to handle it." You're not abandoning them, you're simply refusing to carry what isn't yours to carry. The second part of this phase involves creating what I call an emotional boundaries inventory. Take a full week to track every interaction where you feel drained, resentful, or depleted afterward. Write down specifically what happened, what you gave time, energy advice, emotional support, and what you received in return. Look for patterns. Are there certain people who consistently leave you feeling empty? Are there specific types of conversations that regularly exhaust you? Are there situations where you automatically volunteer to help, even when it's inconvenient for you? This inventory isn't about judging others or yourself. It's about gathering data on your current emotional patterns so you can make conscious choices about where to invest your energy going forward. Phase 2 is shadow integration, and this is where we do the deep Carl Jung shadow work that transforms these patterns at their root. This phase typically takes 3 to 4 weeks and involves systematically reclaiming the parts of yourself that you had to exile in childhood. The centerpiece practice is what I call the neediness reclamation ritual. Every week, identify 3 traits that you judge most harshly in other people: neediness, selfishness, emotional volatility, irresponsibility, weakness, drama, whatever triggers your strongest negative reactions. For each trait, complete this sentence with brutal honesty: "I am also trait, when I," specific example. This requires genuine self-reflection. If you judge neediness in others, look for the ways you're actually quite needy. Maybe you need constant validation through achievement, or you need people to appreciate your help, or you need others to be stable, so you don't have to feel your own anxiety. If you judge selfishness, look for how you're selfish. In more subtle ways, maybe you dominate conversations by helping others process their problems, or you choose partners who allow you to stay in the familiar role of caretaker. Once you've identified how you also embody these traits, journal on this question: what would happen if I let myself be appropriately trait in my relationships? This is where the real transformation happens. What would it look like to be appropriately needy, to directly ask for support when you're struggling to let people know what you need, instead of hoping they'll figure it out? What would appropriate selfishness look like? Prioritizing your own needs, sometimes making choices based on what feels good for you. Saying no without elaborate justifications. The second part of this phase involves creating what I call your needs list, a comprehensive inventory of everything you need emotionally, but rarely ask for directly. This list might include things like physical affection, without having to initiate it, someone to ask how you're doing, and actually listen to the answer, help with household tasks, without having to manage or appreciate the help space, to feel sad without someone trying to cheer you up, recognition for all the invisible emotional labor you do, permission to be imperfect without losing love. Write down at least 20 needs. This might be harder than it sounds. People who grew up too fast often have difficulty even identifying what they need because they've spent so many years focusing on what others need from them. If you're struggling, imagine what you would want someone to offer to your 8-year-old self, or think about what you consistently give to others, but rarely receive yourself. Once you have your list, practice requesting one small need per day without apologizing, explaining why you deserve it, or offering something in return. This might sound impossibly selfish, but it's actually essential for developing healthy interdependence. Start small. Ask your partner to bring you a cup of tea. Ask a friend to listen while you vent about something difficult. Ask a family member to handle something you usually take care of. The goal isn't to become demanding or entitled. It's to gradually expand your capacity to receive care and to let other people practice giving to you. Most people who love you actually want to support you. They just don't know how, because you've trained them to see you as endlessly capable and needless. Phase 3 is conscious participation, where you begin to rebuild your relational world based on your new understanding of your authentic needs and boundaries. This phase typically takes 2 to 3 weeks and focuses on developing what Jung called conscious relationship connections based on mutual recognition rather than unconscious patterns. The foundation of this phase is the container practice, where you learn to assess other people's emotional capacity before deciding how much of yourself to share with them. This isn't about being strategic or manipulative. It's about matching your emotional investment to what each relationship can realistically hold. Create 3 categories for the people in your life. Green zone. People can hold your full emotional range. Your joy, your sorrow, your fears, your excitement, your anger. These are people who can stay present with difficult emotions without trying to fix. You change the subject or make it about their own experience. They offer what psychologists call unconditional positive regard. They love you not for what you do for them, but for who you are. Yellow zone people can handle your positive emotions, but struggle with negative ones. They're wonderful to share good news with, but when you're struggling, they might offer unhelpful advice, try to cheer you up prematurely, or become anxious themselves. There's nothing wrong with these people. Not everyone has the capacity to hold difficult emotions, and that's okay. You just need to adjust your expectations accordingly. Red zone people consistently require you to manage their emotions rather than offering support for yours. They might dump their problems on you regularly, become defensive when you express needs, or somehow manage to make every conversation about their own experience. Again, this isn't about judging them. It's about recognizing that these relationships require you to stay in the caretaking role that you're trying to heal. The key insight is that you don't have to have the same relationship with everyone. You can love someone and simultaneously recognize that they're not capable of emotional reciprocity. You can care about someone while choosing not to share your deepest vulnerabilities with them. This isn't rejection, it's discernment. Practice the 5-step disclosure framework with everyone in your life. First, assess the container. Based on past experience, can this person hold what I'm about to share without becoming overwhelmed, defensive, or making it about themselves? Second, start small. Share something mildly vulnerable and see how they respond. Do they listen with presence? Ask follow-up questions that show genuine interest. Offer appropriate support. Third, notice their response. Do they offer empathy and presence, or do they immediately try to fix your problem, relate it back to their own experience, or change the subject to something more comfortable? Fourth, adjust accordingly. If they handle your vulnerability well, you can deepen the sharing over time. If they struggle with it, you can maintain the relationship at a level that works for both of you. Fifth, honor your findings. Stop overgiving to yellow and red zone people while continuing to invest emotionally in green zone relationships. This doesn't mean cutting people off. It means right-sizing your expectations and energy investment to match what each relationship can actually provide. Your 24-hour integration exercise for this entire protocol is designed to begin rewiring these patterns immediately. Tonight, before you go to sleep, place your hand on your heart and speak directly to the child within you. I see how hard you tried. I see how much you carried that was never yours to carry. I see how you sacrificed your own needs to keep everyone else safe and comfortable. You did such a good job, and it worked. You survived. But now I'm here, and I'm strong enough to carry what's mine while letting others carry what's theirs. You can rest now. You can play now. You can need things now. I've got this. Tomorrow, Choose one specific action that represents caring for yourself, the way you've always cared for others. This might be taking a nap without guilt, saying no to a request without offering extensive explanation, asking for help with something you usually handle alone, or buying yourself something special just because you want it, not because you've earned it through achievement or service. The key is to practice receiving care without reciprocating immediately. Let someone help you and resist the urge to help them back in the same moment. Let someone listen to your problems without offering to solve theirs. Let someone give to you without immediately finding a way to give to them. This will feel uncomfortable. Your nervous system will interpret receiving without giving as dangerous selfishness. That discomfort is not a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're finally doing something different. As you begin this healing work, your unconscious will do everything it can to pull you back into familiar patterns. There are 4 specific pitfalls that almost everyone falls into during this process. Recognizing them early will save you months or even years of confusion and self-blame. The first pitfall is spiritual bypassing, using psychological or spiritual concepts to avoid feeling difficult emotions rather than working through them. This is especially common for people who grew up too fast, because you've already developed sophisticated intellectual defenses against emotional pain. You might find yourself saying things like, "I've released that trauma," or "I don't need to stay stuck in victim consciousness," or "I'm focusing on gratitude instead of dwelling on the past." The early warning signs include using therapy language or spiritual concepts to shut down emotional processing rather than deepening it. You might notice yourself saying, "I've done the work," while still feeling triggered by the same situations. You might catch yourself analyzing your childhood intellectually while remaining disconnected from the actual feelings. You might find yourself teaching others about healing while avoiding your own vulnerable places. Another sign is what I call premature forgiveness, rushing to forgive people who harmed you before you've actually processed the impact of that harm. This often stems from the childhood conditioning that your feelings were inconvenient or dangerous, so you learn to bypass them as quickly as possible to maintain relationships and avoid conflict. The correction for spiritual bypassing is simple, but not easy. When you notice yourself using psychological or spiritual language to avoid feeling something difficult, ask yourself, what would a 7-year-old call this feeling? Use the simplest possible words: scared, sad, mad, lonely, hurt. Then let yourself feel that emotion in your body for at least 2 minutes, without trying to fix it, understand it, or spiritualize it away. Remember that healing isn't about transcending human emotion. It's about finally allowing yourself to be human after decades of trying to be superhuman. The second pitfall is what I call the helper's high, becoming addicted to being needed while convincing yourself that you're just being loving or spiritual. This pitfall is particularly seductive because it feels so righteous. You're not being selfish or lazy. You're helping people. You're being of service. You're using your gifts to heal the world. But watch carefully for the warning signs. Do you feel superior to people who seem less conscious or less evolved than you? Do you find yourself surrounded by people who consistently need your advice, support, or emotional regulation? Do you feel energized by other people's crises and secretly disappointed when they start handling their problems independently? Do you give advice more often than you ask for it? Do you know more about your friends' problems than they know about yours? The helper's high happens because caretaking others allows you to avoid facing your own unhealed wounds while still feeling valuable and needed. It's a sophisticated form of emotional avoidance disguised as generosity. You stay busy managing everyone else's psychological material so you don't have to sit with your own. The correction requires honest self-assessment. Track your helping patterns for 1 full week. Every time you offer advice, provide emotional support, or solve someone's problem, write it down. If you're helping more than 3 times per week, you're likely avoiding your own needs through service to others. Practice saying these words: I trust you to handle this. When someone comes to you with a problem, instead of immediately offering solutions, ask, are you looking for advice, or do you just need someone to listen? Often people don't need your help. They need your presence. Learning the difference will free both you and them from the exhausting cycle of overfunctioning. The third pitfall is emotional flooding. When you start allowing yourself to feel, after decades of suppression, everything can feel overwhelming. You might find yourself crying at television commercials, feeling rage at minor inconveniences, or experiencing sudden waves of grief about events from years ago. This is completely normal. You're essentially catching up on decades of suppressed emotional processing, but it can be frightening if you're not prepared for it. The warning signs include feeling like your emotions are out of control, swinging between numbness and intense reactivity, or feeling like you're falling apart now that you're not holding everything together. You might panic and conclude that this healing work is making things worse, not better. The correction is what trauma therapists call titration, learning to feel in manageable doses rather than all at once. When you notice emotional flooding beginning, set a timer for exactly 2 minutes and allow yourself to feel whatever is coming up. After 2 minutes, shift into active self-soothing. Take deep breaths, place your hand on your heart, remind yourself that you're safe now. Maybe listen to calming music or call a supportive friend. Gradually increase the feeling time as your capacity grows. The goal isn't to eliminate emotional intensity, it's to develop what psychologists call distress tolerance, the ability to stay present with difficult feelings without becoming overwhelmed by them. Remember that emotional flooding usually happens because you're finally safe enough to feel. Your nervous system has been waiting decades to process these experiences, and now that you're creating space for healing, everything that was frozen is starting to thaw. This is a sign that the work is working even though it feels chaotic. The fourth pitfall is the wounded healer complex, believing that your trauma makes you uniquely qualified to heal others while avoiding getting proper support for yourself. This pitfall is especially common for people who developed sophisticated emotional intelligence as children, because helping others feels so natural and meaningful. The warning signs include believing that your wounds give you special insight that others don't have, collecting broken people to fix or heal, giving endless advice to friends and family, while being resistant to receiving guidance yourself, or avoiding professional therapy because you think you understand psychology well enough to heal yourself. You might find yourself saying things like, "I've been through this, so I know how to help," or "People always come to me with their problems because I really understand." While it's true that personal experience can create empathy and insight, the wounded healer becomes problematic when you're using other people's healing as a way to avoid facing your own unfinished business. Carl Jung specifically warned about this pattern. The wounded healer who hasn't healed their own wounds will unconsciously wound others. When you're giving from your wound instead of your wholeness, you're likely to create unhealthy dependencies, enable others' dysfunction, or unconsciously discourage their growth because their healing threatens your sense of purpose. The correction requires honest self-reflection about your motivations for helping others. Ask yourself, am I helping this person because I genuinely believe they need my support and I have the capacity to give it, or am I helping because I need to feel needed, valuable, or special? There's a world of difference between service that flows from love and service that flows from unmet emotional needs. If you find yourself in the wounded healer pattern, the most loving thing you can do for both yourself and others is to get your own professional support. Work with a therapist who understands developmental trauma. Join a support group for adult children from dysfunctional families. Invest in your own healing with the same energy you've been investing in everyone else's. True healing happens when you can offer support to others from a place of overflow rather than emptiness, when you can hold space for their growth without needing them to stay stuck to maintain your sense of purpose, when you can love them enough to let them find their own solutions rather than rescuing them from their natural learning process. As you heal, you'll need to rebuild your relational world around 3 types of safe people. Co-travelers are people doing their own inner work who can witness your journey without fixing or judging. Secure attachers are individuals with healthy boundaries who can both give and receive care naturally. Natural containers are rare souls who can hold space for your full emotional range without becoming depleted. Use this recognition ritual to identify suitable people. Ask by sharing something mildly vulnerable and see how they respond. Listen to whether they offer presence or immediately try to fix or relate with their own story. Deepen by gradually increasing emotional honesty based on their capacity. Carl Jung's shadow work teaches us that true service flows from wholeness, not wounds. Practice the fullness check before helping others. Ask, am I giving from overflow or emptiness? Serve from your gifts, not your need to be needed. This allows you to transition from individual healing to community healing by modeling healthy boundaries, authentic vulnerability, and the radical act of receiving care gracefully. Carl Jung reminds us, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. For those who grew up too fast, this means accepting both your extraordinary capacity to care for others and your fundamental human need to be cared for yourself. It means embracing both your remarkable emotional intelligence and your right to be emotionally supported. It means owning both your ability to handle crisis and your need for peace. The gift was never the burden you carried as a child. The burden was trauma, the inappropriate responsibility, the premature loss of innocence, the suppression of your authentic needs and feelings. But through that trauma, you developed genuine gifts, depth of compassion that comes from intimate knowledge of pain, emotional intelligence that comes from years of reading, subtle cues, strength that comes from surviving what felt unsurvivable, and wisdom that comes from understanding human nature at its most vulnerable. The tragedy isn't that you have these gifts. The tragedy is the unconscious relationship you've had with them. The belief that these gifts make you responsible for everyone else's emotional experience. The conviction that your worth depends on your usefulness. The assumption that needing care yourself somehow negates your ability to provide it to others. These beliefs are the leftover programming from a childhood that taught you to earn love through service and to view your own needs as dangerous threats to your security. But here's what that wounded child couldn't understand then, and what your adult self needs to know. Now, the people who truly love you want to care for you, not because you've earned it through perfect performance, but because caring for you brings them joy. Your worth isn't dependent on your productivity, your emotional availability, or your ability to solve everyone's problems. You matter simply because you exist, because you're here, because you're you. This healing work isn't about becoming someone different. It's about remembering who you were before. The world told you that your authentic self wasn't acceptable. It's about reclaiming the playful child who learned to be serious too soon. The vulnerable child who learned that needing anything was dangerous. The joyful child who learned that happiness was a luxury you couldn't afford. That child is still alive inside you, waiting patiently for permission to come home. They've been in exile for decades, but they haven't disappeared. Every time you feel that familiar ache for someone, to just ask how you're doing and really listen to the answer. That's your inner child speaking. Every time you fantasize about falling apart and having someone strong enough to hold you while you do, that's your authentic self calling for integration. Every time you feel resentful about always being the strong one, that's your soul demanding balance. Tonight before you go to sleep, I want you to place your hand on your heart and speak directly to that child. Say these words out loud, even if it feels strange. I see how hard you tried. I see how much you carried that was never yours to carry. I see how you learned to make yourself small so others could take up space. How you learned to give endlessly so others could receive freely. How you learned to be strong so others could be vulnerable. You did such a good job. Your strategy worked, we survived. But we don't just want to survive anymore. We want to thrive. And thriving means you get to come home now. You get to rest now. You get to play now. You get to need things now. You get to be imperfect and messy and gloriously, beautifully human. I've got this now. I'm strong enough to carry what's mine while letting others carry what's theirs. You can stop working so hard. I love you. Tomorrow, choose one specific action that represents the radical act of caring for yourself the way you've always cared for others. Maybe it's taking that nap you've been putting off without setting an alarm or feeling guilty about productivity. Maybe it's saying no to a social obligation that drains you without offering elaborate explanations or alternative solutions. Maybe it's asking someone for help with something you usually handle alone, and then letting them help without managing the process or feeling like you owe them something in return. Maybe it's buying yourself flowers, not because you've accomplished something or because it's a special occasion, but simply because flowers make you happy. Maybe it's calling in sick when you need a mental health day instead of pushing through because others are counting on you. Maybe it's expressing a preference about where to eat or what movie to watch instead of automatically asking others what they want and adapting to their choices. Whatever you choose, notice the internal resistance. Your nervous system will likely interpret receiving care without giving something back as dangerous selfishness. The voice of the over-functioning child will probably tell you that you're being irresponsible, that people will stop loving you if you're not constantly available to meet their needs, that taking up space or having preferences makes you a burden. That discomfort is not a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're finally doing something different, something that honors the fullness of your humanity instead of just the parts that serve others. Breathe into that discomfort and remind yourself, this is what it feels like to let myself matter. This is what it feels like to practice being human instead of superhuman. Remember, you never had a childhood where you could develop, naturally make age-appropriate mistakes, depend on adults to handle the big emotions and difficult decisions while you focused on playing, learning, and growing. But you still have a future. You still have decades ahead of you where you can practice being the person you were meant to be before trauma taught you to be someone else. This time, you get to write your story consciously. This time, you get to choose relationships based on mutual care rather than unconscious role-playing. This time, you get to serve others from overflow rather than emptiness to give, because you want to, rather than because you have to love, because it brings you joy, rather than because it's the only way you know how to matter. This time, you get to be both strong and soft, both capable and vulnerable, both generous and deserving of generosity. You get to be fully, imperfectly, beautifully human.